Everyone at the Thanksgiving ceremony thought they knew how the night would end. The husband stood tall, proud, with his mistress on his arm, smiling, mocking, believing he had finally broken the woman he once vowed to protect. But what he didn't know was that this Thanksgiving would be remembered for one thing: the moment his arrogance destroyed everything he ever owned. In less than an hour, his reputation, his company, and his future would belong to the very woman he humiliated. And the wife? She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She didn't even look surprised. She had been waiting for this moment. But before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What secret did the wife know? Why was she so calm when her world was supposed to be falling apart? And what did her billionaire father have to do with the ceremony? As we unravel this story, remember one thing: not every betrayal ends quietly. Some end publicly. Her name was Elena Morris, 42 years old, a woman who preferred silence over spectacle, observation over confrontation. She lived in a beautiful colonial house in suburban Connecticut, the kind of home that appeared in magazines with captions like "The American Dream." But dreams, as Elena would learn, can be carefully constructed lies. She had been raised with traditional values by her father, a man who believed that dignity was worth more than gold, though he happened to have both. Elena was soft-spoken, thoughtful, the kind of person who noticed when someone needed help before they asked. She had a degree in finance from an Ivy League school, but she chose to use her brilliance quietly, managing investments, supporting charities, raising their 2 children with care and intention. People often underestimated her. That was their first mistake. She married Daniel Morris when she was 30. He was ambitious, charming, a rising executive at a mid-sized corporate firm. In the beginning, he adored her. He would bring her coffee in bed, leave notes in her briefcase, call her during lunch just to hear her voice. They built a life together, brick by brick, promise by promise. But somewhere along the way, between the promotions and the corner office and the invitations to exclusive clubs, Daniel changed. The man who once couldn't wait to come home began finding reasons to stay away. Business trips stretched longer, meetings ran later. His phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, became an extension of his hand, always face down, always locked, always guarded, like it contained state secrets. Elena noticed everything: the new cologne, the unexplained charges on their shared credit card, the way he flinched when she touched his shoulder. But she said nothing. Not yet, because Elena had learned something important from her father. Patience is not weakness, it's strategy. And then there was Tiffany Hale, 29 years old, bold, loud, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made sure everyone knew she had arrived. She worked in the marketing department at Daniel's company, though her job description seemed to involve more socializing than actual work. She started appearing at corporate events, always dressed just a little too provocatively for a professional setting, always laughing just a little too loudly at Daniel's jokes. At first, Elena thought it was coincidence. Then she thought it was ambition. Then, one evening, she realized it was something else entirely. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon in late October. Daniel had left his laptop open on the dining room table, something he never did. Elena walked past it on her way to the kitchen, and the screen lit up with a notification. She didn't mean to look, or maybe she did. Maybe some part of her had been waiting for this moment. The message preview was short, but it was enough. "Can't wait for tonight, baby. Wear that cologne I like." The sender's name was listed as T.H. Elena stood there, raindrops drumming against the window, her hands gripping the back of a chair. Her first instinct was to scream, to throw the laptop across the room, to call him and demand answers. But she didn't. Instead, she took a photograph of the screen with her phone. She saved it in a folder labeled Household Expenses. And then she went upstairs, made herself a cup of tea, and sat by the window, watching the rain. Because Elena wasn't stupid. She had learned that some battles aren't won by noise. Some are won by patience. Over the next few weeks, Elena became a detective in her own marriage. She started noticing things she had overlooked before, small details that formed a larger, uglier picture. There was the perfume scent that clung to Daniel's shirts, a young, sugary fragrance that smelled nothing like the classic scents Elena wore. There were the receipts she found crumpled in his car, receipts for expensive jewelry, designer handbags, flowers delivered to addresses she didn't recognize. None of these gifts ever made it home to her. And then there was the phone. One evening in early November, after Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch, his phone buzzed on the coffee table. Elena was folding laundry nearby. She glanced over. The screen lit up with a message notification. The name that flashed made her stomach drop. Tiffany, followed by 3 red heart emojis. The message preview read, "Missing you already." Tonight was perfect. Elena's hands trembled as she set down the shirt she was folding. The emojis hit her like a slap. But she did not cry. She did not scream. She simply stood there, staring at the glowing screen until it faded to black. Then she picked up her own phone and took another photograph. Evidence, just in case. A week later, the invitation arrived. It was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to the Morris Company annual Thanksgiving Gala." The event was a tradition, a grand celebration held every year at a luxury hotel in New York City. Executives, shareholders, employees, and their families gathered to celebrate gratitude, success, and the year's achievements. It was also a chance for Daniel to show off, to be seen, to network with people who mattered. He insisted that Elena attend. "You have to come," he said one morning over breakfast, not looking up from his phone. "It's important. Everyone will be there." Elena nodded quietly. "Of course," she said. "I wouldn't miss it." What Daniel didn't tell her was that Tiffany would also be attending, officially listed as part of the marketing team. But Elena already knew. She had checked the guest list herself, and as she sipped her coffee that morning, watching her husband scroll through messages with a faint smile on his face, Elena realized something. This night wasn't about gratitude. It was about exposure. Daniel wanted to parade his new life in front of everyone, to humiliate her publicly, to force her into a corner where she would have no choice but to accept her diminished role. He thought he was in control. He thought he had already won. But what Daniel didn't know was that Elena had been preparing for this moment for weeks. And she wasn't going to that gala as a victim. She was going as a strategist. The week before the gala, Elena did something she hadn't done in months. She drove to her childhood home, a sprawling estate an hour outside the city. Her father, Richard Hale, still lived there, a quiet man in his 70s who had built a massive real estate empire from nothing. He was semi-retired now, spending his days reading, gardening, and occasionally consulting on major deals. But his mind was as sharp as ever. Elena found him in his study, surrounded by books and old photographs. She sat down across from him, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself break. She showed him the messages, the receipts, the photographs. She told him about Tiffany, about the gala, about the humiliation she knew was coming. Her father listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and was silent for a long moment. Then he said just one line, "Then let him destroy himself. Just be ready." Elena looked at him, confused. "Ready for what?" Her father smiled, a cold, calculated smile. "You'll see." What Elena didn't tell anyone, what she had almost forgotten herself, was a secret buried in legal documents from years ago. When her father had restructured his company a decade earlier, he had quietly transferred 60% of his shares to Elena as part of an estate plan. She had signed the papers without thinking much of it. She trusted her father. She didn't need to be involved in the business. But what even Daniel didn't know was that 4 years ago, during a company merger, her father had also purchased a significant stake in Morris Corporation, 40% of the company, to be exact, and those shares had been placed in Elena's name, filed under a trust that Daniel had never bothered to review. On paper, Elena Morris owned controlling interest in the very company her husband thought he ran. She had simply never used it. She had no reason to, until now. And as she sat in her father's study that afternoon, listening to him outline a plan with the precision of a general preparing for battle, Elena realized something. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, and the truth was about to set her free. The days leading up to the gala felt long and heavy. Elena moved through her routines with careful composure, making breakfast, driving the kids to school, attending charity board meetings, On the surface, everything appeared normal, but inside, she was preparing. She met with her father's lawyers, reviewed documents she hadn't looked at in years, and made quiet phone calls to accountants and shareholders. She didn't tell Daniel any of this. He was too busy to notice anyway. He spent his evenings on the phone, laughing at jokes Elena couldn't hear, making plans for a future that didn't include her. Tiffany's name came up often, always in passing, always casual. Tiffany suggested we rebrand the marketing materials. Tiffany thinks we should host the gala differently this year. Elena would nod, smile politely, and say nothing, because she knew something Daniel didn't. The gala wasn't his stage, it was hers, and the performance was about to begin. On the morning of the gala, Elena woke up early. She made herself breakfast, took a long shower, and spent an hour getting ready. She chose a deep navy dress, elegant and understated, with a single strand of pearls her mother had given her years ago. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, not because she looked different, but because she felt different, stronger, calmer, ready. Daniel barely glanced at her as they left the house. He was already on his phone, texting someone, smiling at the screen. Elena didn't ask who. She didn't need to. They drove to the city in silence, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the highway, and as they pulled up to the Grand Hotel where the gala was being held, Elena took a deep breath. This was it. The night everything would change. But not in the way Daniel expected. The ballroom was breathtaking. Gold chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over long tables draped in white linen. Centerpieces of autumn flowers, oranges and reds and deep burgundies, decorated every surface. There were easily 300 people in attendance, executives in tailored suits, families dressed in their finest, photographers moving through the crowd, capturing moments of celebration. A live band played soft jazz in the corner. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It was the kind of event that made you believe in the fairy tale of success, in the idea that hard work and ambition could create beauty and abundance. But Elena knew better. She knew that underneath all the polish and elegance, there were secrets, there was cruelty, there was betrayal, and tonight, all of it was going to be exposed. Elena entered the ballroom on Daniel's arm, and immediately people began greeting her. "Elena, you look stunning. So wonderful to see you. How are the kids?" She smiled, thanked them, made small talk, but Daniel barely acknowledged her. His eyes were scanning the room, looking for someone, and then he found her. Tiffany Hale stood near the bar, wearing a white dress, not cream, not ivory, white, the exact color that, by tradition, the executive wives wore to this event. It was a deliberate choice, a public insult, a statement. Tiffany saw Daniel and waved, her lips curling into a smug smile. She walked over, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. "Daniel," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "you look amazing." She didn't even glance at Elena. It was as if she didn't exist. Daniel smiled, clearly pleased. "You too, Tiffany. That dress is striking." Tiffany laughed, loud enough for people nearby to turn and look. "Well, I figured tonight was special, wanted to make an impression." She finally looked at Elena, her eyes cold. "Didn't know we were doing charity cases tonight," she said, just loud enough for a few people to hear. Her friends, standing nearby, laughed. Elena just smiled politely. She didn't flinch, she didn't react, because she knew something Tiffany didn't. The night was just beginning. As the evening went on, the humiliation continued. Daniel introduced Tiffany to important clients, calling her a key part of our team, while barely mentioning Elena at all. When Elena tried to join a conversation, Daniel interrupted her, redirecting the attention to Tiffany. He kept his hand on Tiffany's waist, guiding her through the crowd as if she were the one who belonged by his side. During the dinner speeches, Daniel stood at the podium and thanked the company's leadership, the board, the employees. He thanked Tiffany by name for her innovative ideas and tireless dedication. He didn't thank Elena once. People noticed. Whispers started circulating. Some looked at Elena with pity. Others looked away, embarrassed. But Elena remained calm, her expression neutral, her posture graceful. She had learned long ago that dignity couldn't be taken from you. It could only be given away. And she wasn't giving anything away tonight. And then, just as dessert was being served, the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room. A man approached the stage, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit. The room seemed to hold its breath, because everyone knew who he was. Richard Hale, billionaire, philanthropist, one of the most powerful men in the state, and Elena's father. Daniel's face went pale. Tiffany looked confused, and Elena, sitting calmly at her table, allowed herself the smallest smile, because everything was about to change. Richard Hale stood at the podium, his presence commanding without effort. The room fell completely silent. Even the waiters stopped moving. He adjusted the microphone, looked out over the crowd, and began speaking. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who had built empires and destroyed competitors with equal precision. "Good evening," he said. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Thanksgiving is a time for gratitude, for reflection, for honoring those who stand by us, especially when we don't deserve it." He paused, letting the words settle. Then he looked directly at Elena. "My daughter has always been the strongest person I know. Quiet, patient, kind, and far too often underestimated." People began glancing at Elena. Cameras turned in her direction. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw tight. Richard continued. "Tonight, I want to correct a misunderstanding that has gone on far too long. There are people in this room who believe they hold power in Morris Corporation. People who believe they control the future of this company." He paused again, his gaze shifting to Daniel. "But the truth is, they don't." The room erupted in whispers. People leaned toward each other, confused, curious. Richard raised his hand, and the noise quieted. "As of tonight," he said, his voice clear and firm, "the controlling shares of Morris Corporation belong to my daughter, Elena Morris." Gasps, murmurs, the click of cameras. Daniel shot to his feet, his face red with anger. "What?" he shouted. "That's impossible. I run this company. I built this company." Richard looked at him with the expression of a man swatting away a fly. "Correction," he said calmly. "You worked in this company. Your title, your salary, your access to company funds and decisions. All of it now requires Elena's approval." The crowd exploded in shocked whispers. Shareholders exchanged glances. Executives pulled out their phones. Tiffany, standing near the bar, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. She tried to walk away quietly, moving toward the exit. But before she could leave, 2 security guards stepped between her and the door. "Ma'am," one of them said politely but firmly, "this area is for executives and shareholders only." Tiffany's face flushed red. She looked at Daniel, desperate, waiting for him to defend her. But Daniel was staring at Elena, his expression a mix of rage and disbelief. And Elena, sitting calmly at her table, simply watched. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just existed, dignified, unshaken, victorious. Richard wasn't finished. He gestured to an assistant who brought a leather folder to the podium. Richard opened it and pulled out a single document. "There's one more thing," he said. "This is the marriage agreement that Daniel Morris signed 10 years ago." He held it up for the room to see, a document he never bothered to read carefully. He turned to Elena. "Would you like to explain?" "Sweetheart." Elena stood, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked to the stage, every eye in the room on her. Richard handed her the microphone. She looked out at the crowd, at Daniel, at Tiffany, and then she spoke. "This agreement," she said, her voice steady, "was drafted by my father's legal team before Daniel and I were married. It was meant to protect both of us in the event of complications." She flipped to the last page. Daniel signed it, but he never read the final clause. She read aloud. "In the event of proven infidelity, the offending party forfeits all shared assets, company stock, and executive position. All holdings revert to the spouse." The room went completely silent. Elena looked at Daniel. "You did this to yourself?" Daniel collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. Tiffany covered her face, mortified. Shareholders stared in stunned silence, and Elena, calm as ever, handed the microphone back to her father and walked off the stage. The applause started slowly. Then it grew. By the time Elena reached her seat, half the room was clapping. Not for the scandal, but for the strength. Daniel sat frozen, staring at nothing. His world had collapsed in less than 10 minutes, The company he thought he controlled, the power he thought he wielded, the future he thought he had secured, all of it, gone. Tiffany tried to approach him, but he waved her away, his face twisted with anger and humiliation. "Get away from me," he hissed. Tiffany's eyes filled with tears. She looked around the room, searching for sympathy, for support, but found none. People turned away. Conversations resumed. She had been exposed, and no one wanted to be associated with her. She left the ballroom quietly, head down, heels clicking against the floor. Elena watched her go. She felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just relief, because the truth was finally out, and the lies could no longer hurt her. After the speeches ended, people approached Elena. Some congratulated her. Others apologized for not seeing what was happening. A few board members asked if she planned to take an active role in the company. "We'll see," she said simply. "Right now, I just want to go home." As she gathered her things, Daniel approached her. He looked broken, desperate. "Elena," he whispered, "please, don't do this. We can fix this. I made a mistake. I'm sorry." Elena looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, quietly, "You did this to yourself, Daniel. Happy Thanksgiving." She walked away, and she didn't look back. And so, the woman they mocked became the woman they respected. Elena took over as the majority shareholder of Morris Corporation. She didn't fire Daniel immediately. She let him resign quietly, with severance, because she wasn't cruel. But she made it clear, his time at the top was over. Under her leadership, the company flourished. Employees appreciated her fairness, investors trusted her judgment, and for the first time in years, Elena slept peacefully, not because she had won, but because she had finally chosen herself. 6 months later, Elena finalized her divorce. She kept the house, the investments, and her dignity. Daniel moved into a small apartment downtown. Tiffany left the city entirely. And Elena? She started a foundation for women going through difficult transitions, offering legal support, financial advice, and a reminder that strength doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like waiting for the right moment. And sometimes it looks like a quiet woman in a navy dress, standing on a stage, reclaiming everything that was always hers. Because karma doesn't need anger. It just needs patience. What would you have done in Elena's place? Would you have confronted him the moment you found out? Or would you have waited, like she did, for the perfect moment to expose everything? And how would you feel if this happened to you? If the person you trusted most betrayed you in front of everyone you knew? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear your thoughts. And if you found this story powerful, wait until you hear what happened in our next one. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Thank you for watching.